Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Investing Sucks. My name is Eric, and thank you so much for tuning in. So today, I wanted to cover a very under the radar kind of company. The reason this company came to my attention was because I was recently screening for value stocks in the TSX, and I was specifically looking at companies that had growing revenue in the double digits, but had very low PEs in the 10 to 15 range. And this was one of the companies that came to my attention. It's Bombardier Recreational Products. And as we can see here, they're currently an $8.4 billion company in Canadian dollars. And if we wanted to look at what those growth rates actually were, it was down in the last year, but it's been pretty strong throughout the years, double digits in 19 and then 20. And then in terms of their earnings, which is where the PE would come from, in the last 12 months, their earnings were about 850 million. So pretty much exactly a 10 PE. Now, one thing I also wanted to point out, because you guys know me on this channel, I like to look at cash flow and not always earnings, especially for companies that you don't really need to look at earnings and you can put more focus on cash flow, which I think this company would classify that as. Their cash flow is actually negative, as we can see here, about 400 million cash flow from operations and then 426 million in capital expenditure. It's been positive in the last years, but it was actually negative this year. And we'll get into why that is in this video and why that's actually interesting. So for those who don't know this company and you don't know what they're all about, they're manufacturers of a lot of well-known power sports products. Most importantly, ski-doos, sea-doos, Can-Am, ATVs, and boats as well. And they're really interesting product because when you think of sea-doos or ski-doos, for example, you really only think of one brand. And the name sea-doo is kind of synonymous with jet skis themselves. And then ski-doos would be synonymous with snowmobiles. It's kind of like brands like Kleenex or Scotch tape or jacuzzis. It's instances where when you think of the product name, what you're actually thinking of is the brand name, which signals a pretty strong competitive advantage because it takes a very strong brand for that to occur. And you need to have very strong brand recognition for people to be so familiar with your product that when they think of the product itself, they actually think of your company's brand name. And this is another example of a company that benefited from the pandemic because of the widespread lockdowns that took place. People spent a lot more time outdoors and they purchased products that would allow them to do different types of outdoor activities. And because this company is definitely a market leader in the categories they serve, they're a very unique company because there's not a lot of companies that sell these types of products. So they do own a lot of the market. So they definitely benefited from that trend. But if we go back to their income statement that we were just looking at, and we actually look at their revenue growth, we can see in the past year it actually declined, which seems kind of contradictory to what I just said about them benefiting from the pandemic. And this was really because there was a lot of issues they faced in regards to product shortages and very, very severe product shortages, which really did hold them back. This is another business that was hit very hard by the chip shortage. The demand for their products did have an abnormally large uptick in the past 2 years because of the widespread lockdowns, but because of the chip shortage, they couldn't really meet that demand. And there was a lot of sales that they left on the table just because they couldn't manufacture their products. So if we look at here in this monthly presentation that they released, we can see how much lower their dealer inventory was of their power sports. We can see a 74% decline going back 2 years, and then a 44% decline going back 1 year in the Q3. Then if we scroll down a bit, we can also see them talking about what they've referred to as their margin profile improved. So they're saying that their margins in their business actually expanded, even though if we go back here, we go back to the financial statement. So their sales were down as we've established, but their margins were actually up. You can see 12% operating margin in 2021, but then 16% in the last 12 months. So to me, what that says is, yep, they faced these shortages and the way they responded was by increasing their prices. Now, they weren't able to sell enough units to kind of compensate for that because they just could not get enough units made because of the shortages that they faced, which is really a big problem. I mean, it's kind of a good problem to have as a business. Like you can't meet the demand for your product, but it's still a problem nonetheless. And you are leaving sales on the table. Now, the other way you could look at that as a value investor is say, okay, because of all this unmet demand, they could use the cash that they generate from the business, just invest it in new factories, invest it in something else so that they can start making more units and then they can get that profit wheel turning again, basically, which is in theory true. but they are, as we've established, facing a shortage because of chips. They just cannot get enough of those to make their products. So even if they make new factories and invest the money in new factories so that they can increase their production, they're still held back by something which is kind of just a general overall economic trend. It's not really something that they can control that much. And from what I've seen, I'm obviously not an expert on the matter, but all the estimates I've seen about the global chip shortage so far are saying that it's going to be at least 1 year, even closer to 3 years in some estimates before it's really fully resolved. And all the big major chip manufacturers can start making more, which can satisfy all the increase in demand that we've seen in the last 2 years. And if we go back to the presentation that we were looking at, we can see they actually provide some details on this right here, where in December of 2021, which hasn't been reported yet, but they're basically saying that they're investing in this new facility right here. So this is CapEx that they've committed to deploy in this new facility, which definitely makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is a company that, if we bring out the income statement again and go back a few years, we can see clearly it's a company that's in growth mode, right? 10% revenue growth here, and then 8%, 6%, and then much higher revenue growth here. And because their revenue has been in double digits for quite a while now, that it's not definitive proof that a company like this has what you would call an economic moat, but there are certain factors we've looked at, like the brand recognition, how differentiated the products they sell are, which kind of make you think about, okay, maybe this company does have some real competitive advantage here that once the chip shortage issues get sorted out, could mean this company is making a lot more money than they are right now, 5-10 years into the future. And I also think there are just some overall trends that we're seeing that are favorable to this company's long-term prospects. Now, when you're looking at industry trends, there's always different ones that you can say this is favorable, this is unfavorable. You really kind of got to marry the two. And then when you actually go on and do an analysis of the company, like a discounted cash flow, which I'll get into in a bit in this video, you have to marry those assumptions that you're making about the industry with the assumptions that you put in your model, because then you can kind of project the future financials for the company and say, okay, if all this happens, it will lead to this much revenue, this much cash flow. And if that occurs, what's my expected investment return? So one trend I wanted to discuss is the trend of work becoming increasingly remote. Now, this was obviously exacerbated by the lockdowns that took place in the last 2 years, but I feel like it's no secret that for now and going into the future, work is becoming increasingly remote. Employees are demanding that, which means employers are going to have to deliver on that, which means people are moving into suburban and rural areas. They're moving away from the city, which is traditionally very expensive to live in because they don't need to live there anymore. And they're moving into these rural areas. And people who live in rural areas are this company's customer, right? A person who lives in a condo or an apartment in downtown Toronto is probably not going to buy an ATV because they just can't really use it. But who will buy an ATV is people who live in, places outside of the city. And, I think that you see evidence of this if you look at Canadian real estate prices as well, because it wasn't just the cities that saw a very large spike in real estate prices in the past 2 years. It was places that have historically not had that much population growth in them. And a lot of people seem to think that that's because people are moving away to the cities and into these other areas because they can work remotely. So interesting connection there. Let me know if you guys agree with that or not. Okay, so now we've covered the context of this company. Let's dive into a DCF valuation, because this will help us know if the company is actually good value based on what we can reasonably project their future to be in the next about 7 years. So if we start with revenue growth, as we've already established, we know of this chip shortage. And again, by all current estimates, it's going to be about 1 to 3 years. Now, it's tough to say exactly how this will impact their revenue, but what I've put here is 5% revenue growth for the next 2 years, because I am assuming that the chip shortage will weigh them down a bit, but it does seem like they do have pricing power because there's such a high demand for their products that they can raise the prices and consumers will still continue to pay for it, again, because the demand is there and they are able to do that. So I'm assuming 5% revenue growth for the next 2 years. And then going forward after that, it will be 8%. So I'm actually assuming the revenue growth is going to increase. Now, 8% did seem reasonable based on what we had seen previously. It was a bit lower than what we had seen previously of kind of double digits. So I went a little bit more conservative there. But really what I'm assuming is that the trend that they've been on is going to continue. And with the EBIT margin, So the operating margin, I went with 14%. Now, as we saw previously, 14% was historically quite high. It kind of rose up to 14%. Now I'm projecting that it's going to stay at that level for the foreseeable future, which may seem a little bit aggressive, but I do think it's reasonable because, as I said before, they have pricing power. They have the ability to raise the prices on their products because demand is so high. Customers want them because they are kind of the industry standard and the brand is very strong. So I'm kind of, through that assumption, I'm pricing in a strong brand and brand recognition. And then, of course, we have taxes and capital expenditures. So with capital expenditures, I assume these will be a bit higher than what they had traditionally been in the next 2 years because they're going to have to invest in production to ramp up production, right? And then going forward, I'm also assuming it will increase gradually because in order for them to hit these sales targets that I've priced in here, they are going to have to make capital expenditures, invest in better infrastructure to produce that. And then a pretty similar pattern with depreciation. And then also with working capital. So I looked at what had been historically. Usually they do have to make working capital investments. For some companies, working capital can actually be a positive cash flow, just depending on if they have good working capital management. For example, a very long days payables outstanding can usually mean that a company can actually have a positive cash flow for working capital. But again, if we're assuming that they're going to ramp up their sales at these growth rates, they're going to have to invest in some inventory in order to meet that. So that's what that is designed to represent. So, and then we go down, we do the rest of the calculations. By the way, I used about a 6.8% discount rate, which is the calculated cost of capital. And then I'm also assuming they're going to buy back about 3% of their outstanding shares every year throughout this whole timeline here. And historically, they've been buying back between 3 and 5%. So that is a little bit more on the safe side. But again, as they grow as a company, they become more profitable, they generate more cash flow. Even if their shares become more expensive, I think they'll still be able to buy back around 3% a year. So what's the final result of this? Well, if you go down, currently their shares are priced at about $103 on the open market as of making this video, and we get a fair value per share of just under $180. So the current price as a percentage of our calculated fair value is just over half, so 57%. So not quite in screaming buy territory, which for me would be between 30 and 50%. And then anything kind of 50 to 80% would be in the potentially undervalued range or undervalued to potentially undervalued. And then everything 80 to 100 is really just a shot in the dark because you have to build in a bit of margin of safety there. You know, if your calculated fair value is only 90% of the current share price, you can't really reasonably conclude that the company is undervalued because there's probably an error in your assumption somewhere or something you assumed isn't quite going to materialize. So in order to account for that, you build in the margin of safety. And then that gives a projected annual investment return of 12%. So historically, if you buy an index fund and you hold it for about 40 years, which is a pretty common investing strategy, you'll get between 8, 9, 10%, depending on what period you invested in. So 12% would historically be market beating. And that's what I think is reasonable for this company, again, based on what we've learned about them. So not necessarily a screaming buy, but if you are someone who's looking to add a company that you think has very strong brand power to your portfolio, or you're just more aggressive about your assumptions, you think the future is brighter than what I've priced in here, then this is definitely a company to take a look at and research a bit more. So I do see many competitive advantages with this company. However, it's not one where I'm so much concerned with the competition that they face, but more so with the size of the overall market itself. And if we look at our model, we are projecting that in the future, they're going to get close to $12 billion in revenue. So they're going to double their revenue in about 7 years. Now, to me, that does kind of seem like a lofty expectation because you need the power sports market to really keep on gaining momentum. And it very well might do that, as we've discussed before. However, there is also a risk that, you know, for one, the success of a company like this is going to be heavily impacted by macroeconomic factors, such as the health of the overall economy, you know, the amount of people that have jobs, because it is a luxury product, right? People who are buying these products tend to be richer. They have some disposable income. And if inflation, for example, remains at high levels into the future, that could really hollow out the middle class and force them away from spending on luxury goods. which could hurt a company like this. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few years you see the company talk about something like that in their annual report. So that is one concern I have. Like any investment, though, there are always going to be risks and potential rewards. And the goal of this channel is not to tell you, what stocks to buy, right? Like buy this, and whatnot. It's to teach a process that can be used to learn about the risks and rewards that exist for particular companies, and then take what you've learned about a company and test out your assumptions into a financial model, and then you can make more informed decisions. But anyways, guys, that pretty much does it for me from this video. So thank you so much for sticking around and listening. If you did enjoy it, then please leave it a like and subscribe if you're new and you enjoy this type of content, and I'll see you in the next video.